It's funny, oddly enough, I wasn't prepared to talk about psychedelics, but I may as well. For me, the most illuminating thing about psychedelics was the insight that I had been living in a particular reality tunnel, right? And that had been constructed for me, and I constructed for myself, and that we all kind of live in these reality tunnels, and there's ways to remove some of the filters and some of the constructs temporarily in order to see, or at least see secondhand through the chemical, but there's a whole bunch of other ways of looking at things. And it set me on a mission really since college, when I had those experiences, to help people get that the reality we're living in is much more up for grabs than most of us acknowledge on a daily basis. That, to use the programming metaphor, that reality is open source, and that if you learn the codes through which it's programmed, you can be a reality programmer rather than just a user. And that we walk around in our daily life mistaking a lot of what is actually software for hardware. You know, that there's stuff we accept as given circumstances, as the way things are, that are actually the way things happen to be. And many of them are the way things happen to be because other people decided that's the way they should be. So I've been, for a long time, looking for, that's why I'm kind of a media theorist now, looking for ways people can really get underneath the content of communication and see the biases of all of the ways in which we communicate, and the biases of all of the social structures, the biases of living in a city that's a grid pattern instead of a round pattern, and realize that these biases are not created by God.
But yeah,
talking about ayahuasca too, and being a chandelier.
Estimate?
Huh?
The comic book that Rushkoff did about that.
It's like, I always thought religions were really cool. I love religions, but I'm fascinated by the fact that people actually believe in the religions. You know, and so I figured, all right, I'm a Jew, so I'm going to look at Jewish literature and Jewish mythology and figure out what is it in there that's telling people you actually have to believe this thing. And as I read Torah and did a lot of studying about what I think were more the intentions of Torah's writers in the context of history at that moment, in other words, what was going on, I got this totally other impression of Torah, that it wasn't meant to be this sort of real estate document saying the Jews are loved most by God and deserve this piece of land and all that, but it's actually a rallying cry for open source reality. It's a myth. It's a story about a group of people who live in a certain kind of slavery, go out into the desert, and then write their own laws. And that writing of laws is supposed to be a continual process. I mean, in the American Constitution, at least as I was taught it, is another great example of people who created a document that was meant to evolve, that was meant to be improved upon, that they accepted there are a bunch of people and there's going to be this other bunch of people. So then, and that's why I wrote this thing that I've just been writing now called Testament, I thought that what I needed to do was to show people the sort of what I see as the real message of these stories and the real use of these allegories and the misuse of them today. Because there's a lot of people who look at the Bible and Torah and all, and they say what's important about it is that it's all true, that all this really happened, that God made the earth in these many days, and Moses existed and went to this mountain and got this divine transmission and then did this, and all this stuff actually happened historically. And I think the mistake that those people are making is that they're confusing mythos with Chronos. They're confusing mythology with history. And that the value of these stories, and to me they are valuable, is not that they happened at some moment in history, but that they are still happening today. They're continually happening today. And I don't mean in the sense of, Revelations means that this bad thing is going to happen today. No, I mean that we are all Cain, jealous of our brother. We're all Moses dealing with this problem, that we're still sacrificing our children to fire gods by sending them off to the Gulf War. and that these stories are deeply relevant, only they've gotten in the hands of like the totally wrong people, and they're being used in a totally silly way, so silly and so sanctimoniously that the power of these prophecies is actually being hidden from us. And most of us think the Bible is just this thing that the Gideons put in the tray of your nightstand in a hotel, and that this is just all that Jerry Falwell stuff, when it totally isn't. And I had this sense that if anybody actually read this stuff, if they just read a couple of chapters, they'd go, oh man, I was looking at Crowley, right? I was reading Adam Blavatsky and all that. This is the source code. This is like the source code through which that has iterated out as this thing we now live in called Western civilization. And that one of the ways to hack this civilization is to get in to that, to the mythological constructs by which we live, in many cases unconsciously, and have an opportunity to kind of experience them firsthand, to receive them ourselves, rather than have them literally administered to us by some high priest. And that then, and this is a very Enlightenment ideal, but then each of us as individuals can develop a sense of agency about how we view the world, about how we experience the world, and how we want to enact a reality that's more consonant with our own ethical sensibilities.
I love that. I think the only time I've heard him mention it on Team Human was with Grant Morrison, where he just kind of drops this aside that he thought of it as his life's work.
Yeah.
Like, wow, that's cool, because I could see that sort of being potentially nonfiction in a metaphorical sense, if one's gonna hold any hope for that kind of, I don't know, viral culture to do a good thing.
Yeah. And this kind of reminds me of what you were mentioning about never thinking about language as a virus from outer space set to entrap us. And that's actually from Genesis. Him and Doug are talking, and he says DNA is a virus from outer space to entrap us, previously immortal beings into mortal beings. And I remember him saying that too, and I was like, oh my god, that's really good. And that's like an evolution of something, Willem S. Burroughs used to say, that language is a virus from outer space. And I was just like, oh my god. And I'm like, I just like kind of like thinking about that, because it gives me this really eerie feeling. Like, talk about insect time.
Yeah. I feel like he enjoyed playing with mythologies, like the way we can create them and the way they can affect us.
Yeah.
It's very Gnostic in a sense. I've been learning a little about this from watching Vervaeke. But when the Gnostics first started, this sort of umbrella term for these movements that all wanted to like uncover what's really going on of all these jackass gods and goddesses throughout history. Like, maybe they're just evil. Maybe it's all the dumb, corrupt demiurge god's fault. And it just becomes like this impulse to transcend not just the self, but the world. At least this is how he framed it. But I can kind of feel that, like, was talking with Chad about this, like, one has a taste sometimes for that kind of like dark and slow burn stuff, like watching Daredevil or Blade Runner or Bug Eye, which kind of brings it back to Burroughs, I guess. I don't know, but he definitely seems to have enjoyed taking things apart.
Yeah.
So that's sort of where I'm at. I do think there's an urgent need for myth, but I think just as urgent as our need for myth is our need to understand that myths themselves are the creations of people, and however they're received.
Or maybe people are the creation of myths.
Well, we co-create, but I think that this stuff is all construction. It's all written, sometimes by smart people, sometimes by groups. I think the reason why Torah is great is because it was written by a bunch of people over a whole lot of time. So it's got the benefit of generations and generations of cumulative effort. That's why that's going to be better than something I probably, sit alone in my closet and write. But that we all have access to this, sometimes alone in ourselves and better with each other, which is why I like this event so much, because we've got, this is cross-fertilization, right? This is what makes something valuable. It's not preaching to our own sort of converted reader base, but actually mixing, talking, engaging. I'm so sick of blogs, right? I just don't care about that person anymore. But I'm totally into discussions, into meetings, into trans faith dialogues and conversation, because that's the way to really get something rolling.